Aberdeen. This is Drive Time on Radio E-Class.
In a world where confusion reigns supreme, there is one place. Drive Time.
Welcome back to Drive Time on Radio Class on 107.8 FM, the voice of sincerity. We're going to our guest now, Peter, who's on the phone. Peter, welcome back to Drive Time.
Yeah, hi Tanvir.
Thank you very much for
inviting me.
No, thank you very much for joining me and Aldine today. Now, I know there's lots happened since the last time we spoke, but let's start off with something locally first. What have you made about the Conservative plans to, change the NHS system?
Well, I'm completely opposed to their plans.
Right.
But I'm also aware of the crocodile tears being shed by
Ed
Miliband and his former health, or the former Labour health minister, Andy Burnham. And what we've got to remember is that they were complicit in initial plans to privatise the National Health Service. So any criticism by them is really hypocrisy. Unfortunately, there's no real opposition in this country, and all the three main parties are in effect singing from the same hymn sheet.
Right. I mean, at the moment, the NHS is quite a big burden to the United Kingdom. Do you feel there needs to be some kind of reform? And obviously you don't agree with privatising it. What could be a possible solution for the National Health Service?
Well, I'm not an expert on the National Health Service, but I do know that the National Health Trusts that were introduced by Labour were just massive quangos and creating jobs for Labour Party members. I know that from my own area in Wigan, and I was even offered a job there myself to try and as a sweetener to try and keep me quiet from criticising them. And when I say a job, I'm talking about payment for turning up one day a month. Now, all that kind of waste should be eliminated, of course. And I think there's lots of scope for improvements in the health service. What we need is more doctors and nurses and better qualities of treatment and less bureaucracy. But privatisation is not the way to achieve that at all.
I mean, it's something that's not really worked in America, is it? So I think
well,
that could be a perfect
in America,
example.
of course, there's no humanity involved at all. And if they find somebody dying on the street, the first thing that they do is to check to see if he's got a credit card or health insurance.
I mean, you could see some of the American influence coming into the United
Absolutely.
Kingdom. I mean, the no-win, no-fee that came over from America, didn't it?
Yes, it's a total privatisation agenda. It's actually catering only for the richest people in society, and the poor will have to suffer, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, what have you made of the current performance of the Conservative government?
Well, as expected, we're governed now by incompetent millionaire public school boys who've never had any experience in the real world anyway. Not that that's a great deal of difference from the previous Labour governments. And I mentioned, I won't mention personalities, but a lot of the front bench in the Labour Party are either public school educated or they've been working in bureaucratic positions within the Labour Party since the day they left school. So we don't have any real body of experience in the government, and we need people who've been working in the real world. But apart from that, the present government, the Tories and the Lib Dems, are serving themselves and the bankers and the financiers and multinational capitalism. Nothing more. They've got no interest in working people whatsoever. Unemployment is soaring, and the real figures are far higher than the published figures, because a lot of people who don't work are not included in the unemployment figures.
Right, but the Conservatives will say that they need to do these harsh changes so that the country doesn't keep on falling into debt.
Well, of course, that's absolute rubbish. What they could do, just a couple of suggestions. We bailed, I'm talking about you, me and every other taxpayer in the country, bailed out the banks, the privately owned capitalist banks. We bailed them out with £1 trillion of British taxpayers' money. The first thing we could do is get that money back.
Right.
If we're going to effectively own the banks because we paid for them, we should own them 100%, and they should be fully nationalised, in my opinion. But an alternative to that is to impose I think it's been referred to as the Tobin tax,
Right.
where all the banks would have to pay. The proposal is for a minute fraction of 1% of their profits as a tax. Now, and that would wipe out all of the national debt. But in fact, as far as I'm concerned, we should start by taxing them quite heavily, and we should stop all the bank bonuses. And those bankers who want to flee abroad, well, let them go and cancel their passports. You know, good riddance as far as I'm concerned. There are plenty of well-qualified people in this country who could do a far better job than the banksters and the fraudsters who actually put the banks into a massive debt. One other thing that we could do that would get the country out of a mess. Why have we been spending billions upon billions of taxpayers' money that could have been spent on health service improvements, on keeping people employed, and all sorts of other socially beneficial things? Why have we been spending those billions on bombing countries into the Stone Age, countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya? So, you know, I don't recall at any time when any of those wars were announced, I don't recall the government of the day saying we can't afford it, we don't have the money. Apparently for some things, money is no object.
Right. I mean, the government would argue that they went to war to prevent war. Do you think that's a fair argument?
Well, I think, you know, history tells us everything. I mean, I'm proud to say that I was one of the ones who opposed all of those wars from the very outset, and so did I can't remember the number of people who demonstrated against the Iraq War before it happened. I think it was up to 2 million people demonstrated. So it was obvious that it wasn't going to be a successful venture in any respect, and it was based on, the Iraq War in particular was based on a complete pack of lies, weapons of mass destruction that could strike us within minutes in the UK. It was an absolute pack of lies. And let's remember, there hadn't been a single incident of so-called Islamic terrorism in the UK prior to the invasion of Libya and Afghanistan.
So are you saying that the foreign policy of the British government has resulted in a rise of radicalisation in this country?
Well, I'm saying that the foreign policy of the Labour government and of this Tory Lib mess is directly responsible for the very few incidents that have occurred in the UK. Let's put it in perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, I can't remember the exact figures. There are something like 2 million Muslims in the UK.
Yeah.
And we've had a handful, literally a handful of people who have been, whether you say radicalised or have resorted to extreme behaviour. And this is a tiny drop in the ocean. I don't think it's representative. And to portray it as some kind of radicalisation of the Muslim community in the UK is not correct. There are people in every society who are committing atrocities, and if we look at America, you've got Christian fundamentalists who've set off more bombs than any Islamic groups. So I don't think it's relevant. I think it's a bogus to talk about Islamic terrorism as regards the UK is a completely bogus argument, and it's something that the likes of the BNP and the EDL jump on to justify their outrageous racism. And of course the governments have contributed to that in a great way. There's something like 1 million people have died as a consequence of the Iraq War.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
Now that's a lot of people, and you know, if you try to line up 1 million people or 1 million coffins and think about that, it's a lot of people. And something like 4 million people in Iraq displaced, and I think almost 1 million of them have gone to Syria, for example, and Jordan and other Arab countries. So what this Western imperialist plan, which is being put into action throughout the Middle East and Africa, and now they're extending it to, trying to extend it to Southeast Asia and even China and Russia. It's part of a plan to really reinvigorate the old imperialist, colonialist methods and control other people's resources.
Okay, now
quite clearly, that's what it is.
You spoke about Iraq. Well, you know, we've seen the latest news about the U.S. Marine Frank Wutrich, who is responsible for a massacre in the region, but he's been let off, you know, because he was a Marine, honourable discharge, they call it, because he served over there. You know, what kind of justice is that, Peter?
Well, of course, it's not justice, and it gives the lie to all the so-called humanitarian interventions that America is involved in. Hardly any of the American murderers and torturers have ever been prosecuted. And when you see something like that, it really just helps to reinforce the complete hypocrisy. And if you compare that with the young guy, I just can't think of his name.
Frank Wutrich. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, sorry.
Frank Wutrich, this is the guy from...
No, the whistleblower I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. I don't know his name, though.
I won't try to think of it now, but the guy who leaked, the young American Marine or soldier who leaked information to WikiLeaks,
yeah.
He's been held in solitary confinement, I think, for almost 2 years.
That's not very fair. I mean, did this man...
So if you compare that,
yeah.
What he actually did was gave factual information about crimes that were being committed by the American government in Iraq, and he gave that information into the public domain. The guy deserves a medal, and yet they want to put him away in prison for life. He's been held in solitary confinement for a year or 2 years, I can't remember.
I mean, which it absolutely, you know, surprises you, because this is a man who told his team to shoot first, ask questions later, and all 8, you know, soldiers have been acquitted.
Well, it shows what kind of a government that exists in America, and it really exposes all the hopes and wishes and joy that people had on the election of Barack Obama. He's just a tool of the U.S. capitalist class and the Zionists.
Yeah.
And you know I don't know what to say really. These people have been getting away with murder for so long, and there are other Americans and British soldiers as well who've been cutting off people's body parts.
Why do you feel,
and taking them home as souvenirs?
Only the Americans and the British. I mean, there's other soldiers there, French, Italian. Why is it always the Americans and the English?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's the case, but it could be possibly that there are more of the Americans and the British who are there, and the contingents from other countries are really just, for the most part, are just token. They're just there to provide a sort of gesture of support from their government. But I don't think that the majority of American soldiers and British soldiers are actually intrinsically evil.
No, this is just a minority, isn't it?
I think it's a minority who are brainwashed by the rhetoric that they read in the right-wing press in America, and the rhetoric that comes from their own government, and they feel that they're untouchable. It surprises me that these people are so stupid to have their photographs taken, urinating on dead bodies and stuff like that. But clearly they are, and but it's this guy who's got off with murder. I mean, it's not really him who should be on trial. Well, he should be on trial, but it's the government that should be on trial.
Well, this
You know?
government is responsible for sending them over there, aren't they? So
Yes.
you do have a valid point. Now let's move on about the Quran burning. Again, US troops have thrown Qurans onto a fire in the Bagram camp in Afghanistan. Some people were killed today, some protesters. Once again,